I got fucked by my brother all night just because I saw him do it. I was studying that day when I heard an odd noise coming from my brother's room. The persistent, indistinct sound piqued my curiosity. At last, I decided to get up and check on what he was doing. The door was slightly opened. I was really astonished when I carefully eased it open. My brother was seated on the bed, with a picture of me that I had taken during my last birthday celebration. His other hand moving in a very intimate way beneath the blanket, however, was what startled me the most. I felt as though my entire body had frozen, and I was in complete shock and unable to speak. Hi everyone, I'm Isabella, a 22-year-old. My family consists of 4 members, my parents and my younger brother Peter, who is 19. We live together in a modest house in the suburbs. While we aren't wealthy, our family life is content and filled with happiness. My father works in construction, and my mother is a nurse at the local hospital. They both put in a lot of effort to give Peter and me the best life possible. Being just 3 years apart, Peter and I share a close bond. We often confide in each other about everything, from academics to the little worries of daily life. But ever since Peter became an adult, I've observed that he's gotten more withdrawn. Although I found it curious at times, I chalked it up to being a normal part of teenage development. Little did I know that this shift would result in an event that completely astonished me and altered my perspective on everything. It started as an ordinary day, no different from any other. My parents had gone out and wouldn't be back until late, leaving just Peter and me at home. I spent the morning tidying up and the afternoon at the table, focusing on my studies. Since childhood, I've always been diligent and meticulous when it comes to academics. To concentrate better, I often chose the quietest spots in the house to study. My room, separated from Peter's by a single wall, was usually peaceful and undisturbed. That afternoon, as I focused on my studies, I was suddenly interrupted by peculiar noises coming from Peter's room. It wasn't the usual music or video games he enjoyed. The sound was steady and rhythmic, yet oddly unpredictable, making it impossible for me to concentrate. Frustrated, I set my book aside and frowned, puzzled by what Peter could be doing. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I started by knocking softly on his door, but there was no response. The strange noise persisted. Unable to resist any longer, I gently pushed the partially open door wider. I was really stunned by what I saw as the door opened. Peter had a picture in his hand as he sat on the bed. I knew right once that it was a picture of myself from my last birthday celebration. Peter's other hand, however, startled me the most. Under the cover, it was moving in a really personal manner. I was frozen in disbelief, unable to process what I had just seen. I was filled with a mixture of contempt and disgust, which made it difficult for me to breathe. Peter turned his head, and the moment he saw me, he froze in place. His face flushed crimson, his eyes wide with a mix of panic and embarrassment. "Sis, what are you doing here?" he stammered, his voice unsteady. In a hurried motion, he yanked the blanket over himself, desperately concealing his actions. His hand gripped the photo tightly, as though terrified I might take it away. The air in the room grew unbearably heavy, an oppressive silence settling between us. It seemed to me that space had frozen and time had paused. My heart raced, my throat constricted, leaving me unable to form words. Peter's eyes were filled with humiliation and panic as he gazed at me. With his shaky hands gripping my photo, he swiftly removed the blanket. "Peter, what are you doing?" I demanded, my voice thick with confusion and anger. "Oh, wait, just listen. I can explain," Peter stammered, his face flushed as he avoided my eyes, his head bowed. "Explain? How could you possibly explain this, Peter? You were holding my photo and—" My voice faltered, unable to continue. The weight of shame and heartbreak began to overshadow my fury. Peter remained silent, not replying. The air in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating. For the first time, the distance between me and my brother felt foreign and unsettling. I wanted to storm out, yet a part of me longed to hear his explanation. "I'm sorry, sis. I don't know why. I didn't mean to," Peter mumbled, his voice fading, his eyes unfocused. His words stirred conflicting emotions in me. The anger inside me roared, but the fear and remorse in his expression left me torn, uncertain of how to respond. I turned away abruptly, my heart racing as if it might burst. Once I reached my room, I shut the door, leaned against the wall, and struggled to steady my breathing, but it felt like an invisible weight was suffocating me. The scene I had just witnessed replayed in my mind, vivid and haunting, refusing to let go. Questions swirled relentlessly in my head. Why would Peter do that? Why me? Had I unknowingly done something to give him the wrong idea? I couldn't help but wonder, was this really the same Peter I once knew? The boy who used to call me Sister Isabella hurriedly, the little brother who ran to me for comfort when he was scared, seemed to have vanished. In his place stood a stranger, with frantic eyes and incomprehensible actions. The sight of him clutching my photo, the sheer panic in his expression when he realized I had seen him, left me completely shaken. That evening I stayed in my room, unable to summon the courage to step outside. The house felt different, cold and heavy, as though everything had shifted in a single afternoon. I couldn't focus on anything. The same images played over and over in my mind, refusing to grant me a moment of peace. Fear slowly crept over me, but it was oddly intertwined with something I couldn't quite define. A strange, unfamiliar sensation. It wasn't just confusion or disappointment. It was an unsettling discomfort within myself. For the first time, I realized that Peter, my younger brother, whom I had always seen as carefree, harbored feelings for me that went far beyond the bond of family. I was unsure of how to handle my emotions. There was a part of me that was disgusted and enraged at how twisted our relationship had become. But there was also a part of me that saw complexity in Peter's eyes at that same moment. Bewilderment and uncertainty, but also intensity. I felt weird about it. I pondered whether this was something I could never control, or whether I had unintentionally created some hazy gap that Peter misinterpreted. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling while a weird, frightful, and depressing feeling kept arising, as though it were undermining my reason. I kept thinking about what had happened, and Peter's gaze. I prayed I could wake up and forget it all, since it seemed like a nightmare. The following day, I woke up early, making an effort to act as if everything was normal and that nothing had happened. Peter had already left the room, but he didn't look at me or say a single word. I could see his eyes filled with avoidance and confusion, as if he just wanted to vanish from the situation entirely. When my parents returned in the afternoon, they greeted us cheerfully, completely unaware of the heavy atmosphere that had quietly settled around us. I attempted to smile while responding to my mother's usual questions, but my heart felt perpetually weighed down. Peter sat at the dining table, unusually quiet. He kept his head bowed and quickly ate his breakfast without saying anything or acknowledging anyone, before retreating to his room. In the next days, Peter, my younger brother, practically shut himself in his room from morning till night. He only came out when absolutely necessary, like to eat, and even then he avoided meeting my eyes. It was as if he were fleeing from me and from the weight of his own shame and regret. I felt lost, unsure of what to do. That strange, unsettling feeling lingered, but my concern for Peter outweighed it. He was my closest companion, and I couldn't bear the thought of this, driving a permanent wedge between us. The extended silence only added to my sense of pressure and exhaustion. One evening, as I sat alone in my room, I felt I could no longer bear it. My parents were fast asleep, and the house was so quiet that the ticking of the wall clock was the only sound. I resolved to do something with Peter to break the tension. Stepping out of my room, I paused in front of Peter's door. The faint light seeping through the crack beneath the door indicated he was still awake. Taking a deep breath, I knocked on the door gently. "Peter, may I come in?" I asked softly, my voice quieter than usual. There was a brief silence before I heard his hesitant, low reply. "Come in." Pushing the door open, I found Peter sitting on his bed, his back resting against the wall, his gaze fixed downward, avoiding mine. The room felt heavy, as though an invisible wall separated us, one neither of us dared to breach. "Peter," I started, perching on the edge of the bed, keeping some space between us. "I want to talk about that day." "Don't talk it again," Peter cut me off abruptly, his voice shaking. He turned away quickly, as if facing me was too much to bear. "I know I messed up. I'm sorry, but I can't listen to anything you have to say about it." I watched him, my heart tightening. The confident, carefree Peter I once knew was gone, replaced by a hurt and lost younger brother. I exhaled softly, trying to keep my tone gentle. I finally said, "I'm not angry with you, Peter. I just want to understand why it happened. More than that, I don't want to see you shutting yourself away like this. You're my little brother, no matter what. I'm still your family." Peter remained quiet, his shoulders trembling slightly. After a moment, he murmured, "I don't know. I really don't know why. I didn't want it to happen, but I couldn't control it. It just happened. And when you saw, I wanted to disappear." His voice cracked, trembling as though he were on the verge of tears. I could sense the turmoil within him, and the sight of his pain hurt me more deeply than anything else. I didn't say anything, sitting beside him in silence, allowing him the space to regain his composure. After a while, Peter spoke again, his voice rough and unsteady. "I don't want you to think badly of me. I know it's wrong, but I don't understand why I feel this way about you. I hate myself for it. I hate this feeling. I don't want things to change between us." I looked at Peter, my emotions churning. His raw honesty left me both pained and conflicted. I didn't have the answers or know how to fix what was broken, but one thing was clear. Peter needed me, not as a flawless sister, but as someone who could help him navigate through this. I sat on the edge of the bed, the space between us feeling like a taut, fragile thread, ready to snap with the slightest movement. Peter kept his head bowed, his hands gripping the blanket tightly, caught in a battle with emotions he couldn't contain. "Peter," I whispered, my voice unsteady but soft. I placed my hands on his shoulders, feeling the tension coursing through him. "I don't want you to hate yourself. We're all struggling with our feelings, but if it helps, I want us to face this together and get through it once and for all." Peter lifted his gaze to mine, his eyes red, filled with confusion and conflict. "You mean it? You don't hate me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion, part pleading, part uncertain. I nodded, my heart weighed down by the enormity of what I had just said. "I want to help you through this, Peter. If it's what you need, I'll be here for you." He studied my face, as though searching for reassurance in my words. Then, as if he could no longer contain his feelings, he reached out and embraced me tightly, holding on as though afraid I might depart. I didn't pull away. Rather, I gently stroked his back, offering comfort, even as I wrestled with uncertainty about whether it was the right thing to do. "Sis," Peter said softly, his breath brushing against my ear. "I don't know if this is right, but I can't stop." My body stiffened, yet I didn't pull away. He leaned in closer, his eyes looking at me, silently asking for my ultimate permission. In that fleeting moment, my rational thoughts were drowned by a surge of emotion. I wasn't certain what decision I had made, but when his lips met mine, I didn't resist. The kiss was tender yet intense, carrying the weight of unspoken feelings. In that instant, every barrier between us dissolved completely. I knew deep down this was wrong. My mind shouted warnings, reminding me of the lines we should never cross, but my heart, driven by empathy and the need to soothe his pain, prevailed. Peter had been consumed by despair, and if this was the only way to pull him from the darkness, I felt it was worth it. As my hand gently grazed his back, the last shred of gap between us vanished. Peter gazed at me, his eyes a mixture of hope and fear, as though waiting for a final cue. When his lips met mine, soft yet charged with deep emotion, I realized we had crossed a boundary we couldn't return from. That night, the oppressive silence between us vanished. We were consumed by unspoken emotions, as if both of us were desperate to erase the pain and lose ourselves completely. Everything unfolded like a whirlwind, pulling Peter and me into a vortex of overwhelming feelings. When it was over, I quietly sat up, hastily slipped on my shirt, and left the room. Peter remained silent, lying motionless on the bed, his eyes half closed, seemingly adrift in a sea of turbulent thoughts. I couldn't bring myself to look back. Once in my room, I perched on the edge of my bed, lost in a daze. My body felt drained, but it was my soul that bore the heaviest burden. I wasn't sure if I had made the right choice, but I could only hope it would help Peter find his way out of the emotional turmoil. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained, as if I had just fought through a battle that lasted all night. The events of the previous evening still lingered in my mind, making it impossible to focus on anything. But then I made a decision to push everything aside. No matter what had happened, I had to keep moving forward, face Peter, and see if my choices would lead to the outcome I hoped for. As I walked into the living room, my heart was racing. The first thing I saw was Peter sitting on the sofa, his eyes bright and wearing a gentle smile, just like he always did. "Good morning, sis," he greeted cheerfully, his voice more relaxed than I had ever heard. I was momentarily stunned, unsure of how to respond. His demeanor now was completely different from the Peter I had seen the night before. He no longer wore that somber, lost, or hurt expression. Peter seemed to be the carefree younger brother I once knew, as if all the heavy emotions from before had vanished. Peter noticed me standing there, lost in thought, and smiled. He asked, "What's wrong? You seem exhausted. Didn't sleep well?" I mustered a faint smile, trying to mask the storm brewing inside me. "It's fine. I'm just a bit tired." Peter got up, stepped forward, and rested a hand on my shoulder, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you for everything. I think I've moved past it now. I know last night was tough for you, but I feel so much better today." His words stirred conflicting emotions within me. On one hand, I felt relieved that my choice had helped Peter heal, but on the other, a lingering guilt gnawed at me. After Peter left, I sat alone in the living room, reflecting on all that had transpired. It was comforting to see him happy again, but I understood the heavy cost of making that happen. I promised myself that this would be the last time. Peter had moved past his feelings of loss, and I needed to make an effort to restore things to how they once were. But could I truly move on without the weight of my mistakes lingering? The answer remained uncertain. From that point on, everything between Peter and me seemed to return to normal. We never spoke of that night again, as though it had never happened. Peter continued to smile and talk to me cheerfully, still calling me sister in his usual relaxed, carefree way. It seemed he had truly overcome the heavy emotions that had once burdened him. Seeing him happy and at peace brought me some relief, but deep down the guilt still loomed over me, a shadow that I couldn't escape. Every time Peter gave me a composed expression, I wondered if he had truly forgotten about it, or whether he was only attempting to disguise everything to avoid making me feel even more uncomfortable. We continued to speak as normal each day that went by. Peter shared with me his aspirations for the future and the things he hoped to accomplish. I nodded, listened, and occasionally gave him encouragement. In times like those, though, I couldn't help but go back to the day we crossed that line. One day, as Peter sat next to me in the living room, sharing something funny, I suddenly burst into laughter. Peter turned to look at me, his eyes bright with happiness, but also holding a tenderness I had never noticed before. "You look beautiful when you smile," he said softly. I paused for a moment, then tried to brush it off. "Oh, come on, stop flattering me," I said, my voice betraying a hint of tension. He just smiled and didn't say anything more, and we continued talking as if nothing had changed. Nevertheless, I couldn't stop wondering what Peter's true thoughts were. Was it truly over, or was he still holding on to something that neither of us should have? While Peter seemed able to forget, I couldn't. Every night as I lay alone, the memories of that night would overwhelm me, leaving me feeling smothered. I asked myself if I could go back. Would I make the same choice again? The answer was never clear. I felt happy that Peter was no longer burdened by my conflicted emotions. But that relief came with a heavy weight of guilt. I had overcome a boundary that should never have been crossed. Every time I looked at Henry, my husband, my heart ached more. Henry had no idea what had happened. He still treated me with love and unwavering trust, which only intensified my guilt. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to confess, partly because I feared losing everything, and partly because I didn't want to jeopardize the fragile bond that was slowly rebuilding between Peter and me. However, I reminded myself that I needed to move forward. What had happened was beyond my control, and the only thing I could do was ensure it would never occur again. Peter now appeared genuinely happy. He smiled more often, and his eyes sparkled when he spoke about his future plans. Seeing him like that made me feel a bit lighter. Perhaps what I did was the right choice, at least for Peter. However, for me, that lingering feeling remained, casting a long shadow over my thoughts. I'm not certain I can ever fully escape it, but I've come to accept living with it as part of the price I must pay. Regardless of the circumstances, I know I have to continue fulfilling my responsibilities as a wife and a sister within this family. Each day, I attempt to remove negative thoughts and find ways to heal my heart, because I know that to protect my current happiness, I must not let anything weigh me down. Looking back, I realize my biggest mistake was letting my emotions overpower my reason. I wasn't honest with myself or with those I loved. Instead of confronting my loneliness and finding a healthy way to cope, I chose the wrong path that left a lasting scar on my heart. Marriage and any relationship require honesty and communication. Avoiding internal struggles only makes things worse. Rather than trying to fix it alone, I should have spoken openly with Henry from the start. I should have expressed that I needed him more, that I craved a deeper connection and care. My mistake not only damaged my self-esteem, but also had lasting effects on my relationship with Peter. I've realized that emotions, no matter how intense, must be managed because uncontrolled emotions often result in poor decisions that disrupt our peace and affect those around us. Honesty, morality, and self-respect are invaluable and should never be compromised. Be truthful about your feelings. Don't suppress or hide negative emotions. Share them with someone you trust, especially a partner or loved one. Addressing issues early on can lead to better solutions. Also, respecting boundaries in any relationship is crucial. Maintaining these boundaries is essential. Don't let impulsive emotions cloud your judgment and lead to choices you might regret for a lifetime. Find healthy ways to relieve stress effectively. When you experience feelings of loneliness or stress, it's important to seek out positive and healthy methods to cope, such as engaging in regular exercise, participating in activities you enjoy, or reaching out to friends for support. Don't allow feelings of loneliness to push you toward making poor decisions. Understand the true value of marriage. It encompasses not just love, but also commitment, loyalty, and a sense of responsibility toward one another. It's crucial not to let short-term challenges derail a long-term relationship that you have invested so much in. My story serves as a valuable lesson for everyone. I sincerely hope that when individuals feel lost or overwhelmed, they will take the time to reflect thoughtfully and seek help, rather than acting impulsively in a moment of weakness. Don't allow temporary mistakes to undermine the precious relationships and achievements you have built over time. With that, my story comes to a close. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to my heartfelt confession. I truly hope that this narrative can impart meaningful lessons. That's the end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you found our content engaging, a thumbs up and sharing it with your loved ones would be much appreciated. Make sure to subscribe to Love 30K Stories and turn on the notification bell for updates on our latest videos. Your support is everything to us. Until next time, take care and goodbye.